Okay, this last part of today's lecture is going to be on advanced and introductory resistance training programs. So the first thing that we need to do is kind of go back into our brains and remember what are some of the different muscle fiber variables. So what goes into creating the strength gains that we want our clients to see. So the very first thing I want you to do is review your fiber type. So this is a great video that one of my colleagues at Cal State Fullerton made, and it kind of describes the different fiber types in a really succinct and nice way. In fact, he has a few different videos, one of which you're going to see later in this lecture, of which I think it's great for you to subscribe to because he takes really complex content and he's able to describe it in a way that I think is nice and easier to understand. So I want you to pause right now this video. I want you to go open your lecture in your PDF format and click on this link so you can watch this video. It's about 5 minutes long, but it's worth it. It's going to help you understand some of the things that we discussed later in this lecture. So pause. When you're done, come back to me. Okay, so hopefully you just went over something that looked like this. Now, Dr. Galpin didn't go over the 3 different type 2 muscle fibers, but he did kind of talk about how we know there's a type 1 and type 2, and there's kind of 2 type 2s, and then there's this hybrid between the 2 of them, right? And that's definitely the most latest research. And so what's important for us to understand is that depending on how we train, we're going to see a change in our muscle fiber types. So remembering what he said, as we get more sedentary, we have this tendency for our muscle fiber types to become this hybrid version. And it's kind of because they just don't necessarily know what we want. Do you want us to be a muscle fiber type 2A or do we want it to be a 2B? They're confused, right? But what you do see is that as people start to train more, and by train I mean resistance train, you start to see those hybrid muscle fiber types becoming more distinct and they kind of choose a route, right? Okay, now I'm a type 2A or now I'm a type 1. Okay, so that's important for us to understand. Most of the time, our muscle fibers are going to change into type 2 when we're doing resistance training rather than type 1. Remembering that 1 is going to be more endurance-based, type 1, and type 2 is going to be more fast-acting, quick. We need them for more explosive type movements. So that would make sense that with resistance training, we're going to see an increase in our type 2 muscle fibers. So again, this is another video by Dr. Galpin, and I want you to pause. It's 5 minutes long, and it's worth the review. So it goes into some of the basics behind the physiology of strength and why it is that we can get stronger without seeing any changes in size. And that's an important thing for us to understand when we're training our clients, because oftentimes our clients might be looking for that. Right? What they come to us is they say, I want to get stronger, but what they mean is they want to get bigger. Okay, and so those are 2 different things, and in being able to explain the physiology behind that is very important. So pause right now, go to your PDF notes, click play, watch this short 5-minute video, and then come back to me. Okay, so now let's look at some kind of muscle adaptations that happen with anaerobic and aerobic training. So when we think about anaerobic training, we're kind of closer to thinking about resistance training, although truthfully, oftentimes resistance training doesn't have to be anaerobic. So what you see in this table is you see the different muscle fiber variables kind of going down. So that includes fiber size, our fast heavy chain myosin, our type 2 muscle fiber subtype conversion, so converting from type 2A to type 2B, right? And how that changes based on whether or not you're training in resistance training or you're doing aerobic-based endurance training. Okay, and so what you can see are these differences, right? With fiber size, you really see an increase with resistance training, but you may not see that increase with aerobic training, although if it does happen, it's going to be minute. Okay, with capillary density, that's where it changes. With aerobic training, you see the increase in capillary density. That makes sense because the amount of oxygen that we need delivered for our muscles with aerobics-based exercises. And then capillary density really doesn't see any changes and or maybe potentially decreases with resistance training. You see a decrease in mitochondrial density versus an increase in resistance versus aerobic training respectively. And then you see an increase in the amount of fast heavy chain myosin. And remember, those are those kind of proteins that are that muscle thick protein, and it's that filament, and it works with actin to help us contract muscles. So the more fast heavy chain myosin we have, the kind of stronger we're going to be able to be because we can lift heavier quicker. And then the type 2 muscle fiber subtype conversion, when we're doing resistance training, again, we see most of them going to type 2A. Really, the only time you start to see that with aerobic-based exercise is when you're doing sprint intervals. So I realize that what I'm about to show you right now is kind of a lot to take in. This actually comes from your NSCA book, so I wanted to highlight it. And these are just some examples of how to program resistance training. So there are 3 different types on here, right? That very first one, and you can see the label at the top, this is for a type of exercise prescription that's going to start with power-based exercises. It's going to go to core exercises. And to be clear, when we say core, we don't mean our abdominals. We're saying core versus assistance exercises. We covered that in lecture 2 or part 2 of this lecture. So we start with power, and then we go to those kind of core primary exercises, and then we go to those assistance exercises. And those can then be divided into multi-joint exercises and single joint exercises, large muscles and small muscles, right? So that's that first example. The second example is programming from starting with multi-joint exercises and then going to single joint exercises. So your multi-joint exercises are going to be typically the ones that use larger muscles. So a squat and a press, a back squat, an incline bench press. Then you're going to go into your single joint exercises like a leg curl or a shoulder abduction, right? Or a 3-way shoulder. And those are going to be your smaller muscles, but again, single joint exercises. So that's that middle programming. A third example of programming for resistance training is training your large muscles to your small muscles. So starting with really big, powerful exercises like a power snatch, then going into some core exercises like an overhead squat and snatch or Romanian deadlift, all of which are multi-joint exercises and large muscle groups. Then going down into our small muscle groups, right? Bent over row, lateral raise, abdominal crunch. So again, right here alone on this one page, you see 3 different ways of creating an exercise program that focuses on resistance training. Here's 2 more, right? We have this push and pull, and then we have upper body versus lower body. So push and pull is literally pushing movements versus pulling movements, right? But these movements can then be further classified as core exercises or assistance exercises, right? So a back squat is a great example of a core exercise. It's working major muscle groups, large multi-joint exercise. A leg curl is working those kind of smaller muscle groups, and it's a single joint exercise. So what you tend to see is that core exercises are always aligned with multi-joint, or typically aligned with multi-joint, and assistant exercises are typically aligned with single joint. Where you see kind of an example where that doesn't align is number 8, where you see a lat pull down. Okay, that is an assistant exercise, but it's still multi-joint. Okay. And then our other example here is upper versus lower body. And what you can simply see is that it just alternates between upper and lower and upper and lower. And the kind of the order of whether it's core or an assistant is really just dependent on the movement, right? But the key behind this type of programming is you're simply alternating between upper and lower body exercises. So those were some examples that you could use in your programming for your client and or when you go on and program as an actual personal trainer. So how we create our programming and the kind of things that go into our programming should really be dependent on our client's goals and experience levels. So this is kind of a nice table based on NSCA's guidelines of what endurance versus hypertrophy versus strength training includes. So endurance training is going to be anything that's greater than or equal to, or greater than, 12 reps, including 3 sets, and then you have rest of about 30 to 60 seconds. Okay, so endurance training, you're doing a lot, okay, tends to be lighter weight. Hypertrophy training is kind of that middle ground, so it's 8 to 12 reps, 3 to 5 sets, 1 to 2 minutes of rest. When you're doing true strength training, you're gonna do reps of less than 6 or less than or equal to 6 and sets of 3 to 5. Okay, again, with that, you're gonna need higher rest because you're lifting heavier amount of weight. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you what ACSM uses for their recommendations for resistance training programs. What I like about ACSM is that not only do you have this different focus on emphasis, so strength, hypertrophy, and endurance, notice that ACSM also includes power, which is really great. They also include the different recommendations based on their training level. So for instance, if you have a client who is intermediate and on week 6 they want to work on power, you can use this and say, oh great, my client's intermediate, they want to work on power. I know that I'm going to have them load at about 80% of their 1RM. And then I know I'm gonna have about 1 to 3 sets with 3 to 6 reps. My velocity, which is how fast you're doing these movements, are gonna be fast, right? Because it's power training. And I'm gonna do that about 2 to 4 times a week, right? So you can kind of follow that load or that kind of schematic here on this chart. This gives you a lot of information, and it's a really nice guideline for people to use for training their clients. This is kind of another general guideline. Again, this comes from NSCA, right? So for novice or beginner lifters, they're going to go anywhere from 2 to 3 times per week. For intermediate, it's going to be 3 if they're doing total body training, or 4 if they're doing split routines. And then if they're advanced, they can probably do a little bit more, so 4 to 6 times per week. Again, that's a lot, but if you go back to this one chart, it kind of has everything in there for you. So I kind of recommend using something like this because it's nice, it's comprehensive, you can go back to it and get a lot of information for training your different clients. So with that, if you all have any questions, please reach out, let me know. Happy to answer any of them, and I will see you all in lab.